Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of the 2025 Science Summit at the UN General Assembly, which is entitled Towards the Global AI Compact, Sovereignty, Sustainability, and Economic Growth. My name is Lisa Mattias, and I'm the Vice President of Capacity Building and Innovation at the Information and Communications Technology Council of Canada, also known as ICTC. On behalf of ICTC and our partners at Adra, the AI Data and Robotics Association, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our discussion. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples that ICTC is proud to live, work, and collaborate alongside. Today, we're pleased to be joined by a number of individuals that we're eager to hear their perspectives from. This session's panel, following the keynote presentations, will be using the Q&A function to help ask questions of our panelists. So we encourage you as the audience to input your questions. Today's session will additionally be recorded and shared with attendees. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Philippe Piatkiewicz, Secretary General of the AI Data and Robotics Association, Adra.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Lisa. And I'm going to set a little bit of the context that we find ourselves in. I'll tell you in the first instance a little bit about Adra and a little bit about how we form this relationship with the ICTC. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about human centricity and how it forms a kind of core value set, I think, for the EU in particular, but also with some of our trusted partners like Canada and others around the world. And as Adra, this is a really important part of who we are as an organization. The technology transformation that we're seeing at the moment is leading to, finally, and in which AI plays a really key role, is triggering a global competition for tech leadership. So over the next few decades, Europe, Canada, the world needs to embrace this change because it's going to bring a lot of benefits to society. It's going to support our ability to overcome critical challenges and society's some of the society's greatest challenges, the environment. So these technologies hold immense potential to improve people's life and significantly accelerate efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So as a result, the need for delivering trustworthy AI data and robotics technologies is for us as a kind of a central point for driving economic growth and digital sovereignty and ensuring that at least the European economy stays competitive. So as Adra, our vision is really seeing these technologies being deployed in these types of environments as we're seeing here, where they're able to tackle directly some of industry's challenges and be deployed in environments where they are placed face-to-face with other humans. In intimate settings, in settings where there needs to be an interchange and exchange between technology and the human. So what that means for us is that we're seeing a move from Industry 4.0 technologies to Industry 5.0. And fundamentally, this change is seeing technology being human-centered. So as I mentioned already, it sees the technology moving into an environment where we have to develop some form of relationship. And that means that the technologies themselves not only have to be robust from a technical perspective, but they also have to be technologies that respect our fundamental values, reflect our kind of cultural drivers, and therefore they have to be optimized in a way that's much more complex, but much more also kind of coherent from the development itself, from the software all the way through to the hardware. And there are going to be significant changes that we're going to see in the technologies as they develop, that will mean that the way that we interact and the way that we develop them is going to be has to be embedded with a sense of trustworthiness and robustness. The reason for these motivations is that the technology is likely to benefit from this from the human feedback loop. So by directly incorporating inputs from human users, we see significant changes in advancements in the technologies. We're able to better fine-tune, and we see that these technologies are gradually becoming more bespoke in their applications. And this is a trend that is likely to continue. The learning of these models benefits greatly from human interactions, and they're able to perform tasks and evolve much more rapidly. And finally, the experience itself is likely to become much more personalized and create an enhanced user experience. So you see from these examples that we're going to have to develop a much more sensitive approach to the way that these exchanges happen, predominantly because they're based on data exchanges. There needs to be a respect for cultural values, linguistic values as these technologies develop. And this brings me to how the relationship with ICTC started, and it was basically in this context of Horizon Europe. So Horizon Europe is one of the largest and most successful R&D programs. It supports interdisciplinary and global research to the tune of 100 billion euros from 2021 to 2027. And it's really an accelerant for these types of collaborative projects. Now with Canada being a full partner of the program, projects that respond to the need for trustworthy technologies that are able to tackle the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And it's an umbrella program that allows us to kind of analyze and research some of these cultural factors that are going to be critical in developing these in the technologies, and allow for that kind of diversity of knowledge and to create a kind of common base of understanding of what trustworthiness and defined trustworthiness as a concept. So just to conclude, we see from the trends themselves of the technology that it's moving in the direction that brings us in direct kind of with the requirement to kind of create a much more sensitive understanding of the relationship between machines and humans. So there's a need to align on ethical questions and on core values. There's a need also here to mitigate safety and risks. And with the AI Act as a kind of initial step to thinking about some of these considerations, we need to look at what that means in a much more kind of practical understanding of when these technologies are deployed in society. It also respects the fact that these technologies should be democratized and avoids a kind of AI arms race, but understands that the technologies offer great benefits, should offer great benefits to all. So equitable access and sharing the benefits. And finally, it's about standardization and interoperability. So making sure that we're able to agree on common technical standards, data sharing protocols, etc., so that we can define responsible AI collectively. And finally, establishing a kind of governance and an accountability framework for AI systems that may cause harm or may be used irresponsibly. So thank you very much for giving me the time to speak, and I will hand back over to Lisa at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philip, for those valuable perspectives. Now I'm delighted to welcome our second keynote speaker, who will additionally moderate this session's panel, Namir Anani, President and CEO of the Information and Communications Technology Council of Canada. Over to you, Namir.
Thank you, Lisa, for the introduction, and thank you also to the United Nations General Assembly for the opportunity to dialogue and exchange on a subject of interest to all of us, and that is AI sovereignty and economic growth, specifically at a time when we're all grappling with many forces that are demanding our full attention, from climate change to softening economic trends, trade dynamics, health risks, cyber threats, and changing labor markets. So the ability to harness the full potential of this technology, AI, to resolve some of or address some of the global challenges, but at the same time, create a shared digital future is going to be critical in the next number of years. Bonjour à toutes et tous, je suis vraiment ravi de vous retrouver aujourd'hui pour explorer ensemble les grandes questions que soulève l'intelligence artificielle, et puis pour aussi comment en faire donc un moteur de développement économique équitable et durable. I think it's fair to say that we live in an era of rapid disruption, and technologies such as AI and other advanced technologies are, while they're introducing many innovations, they're also disrupting industries faster than economies can adjust. If we look recently at the rise, the development of what they call the agentic AI systems and robotics, as Philippe mentioned, ultimately these systems, not only they're able to reason, but adapt and also make autonomous actions. So this ability is quite a considerable capability that's going to develop in the future. And we have to look into how do we harness it to the best advantage from a national perspective for economic growth, but also resiliency, very similar to energy and natural resources that we've done in the past. And interestingly, the economic stakes are high. If we look at the numbers associated with that, they certainly tell a story. It's projected, as many of you maybe have read, that AI will be generating approximately 15.7 trillion to the world economy by 2030. And at the same time, it potentially can contribute to an enhancement in productivity factor by up to 3.3% annually, which is quite considerable, specifically in an era where we're very much competing in a global landscape. On the other side of this is that it's estimated that approximately 375 million workers across the world will need to be reskilled or shift into new occupations. And lastly is that while many countries are developing AI strategies and concepts, we don't have a global formal treaty to govern AI. And obviously the United Nations Digital Compact and the OECD AI principles go a long way to do that, but we're still in the early stage of creating that landscape going forward. Now I'd like to tackle potentially 5 key areas that govern, I would say, the ecosystem of the development, deployment, and governance of AI. In fact, these 5 topics will be discussed at the panel to follow this presentation. The first one is one that we've all heard about, is the balance between innovation and regulation. We all know that innovation accelerates much faster than regulations, creating a governance gap. Too little regulations can create societal harm, biases, and even concentration of power. Too much regulations can stifle innovation and entrepreneurship, but also impede investment and adoption of AI, which is contrary to where we want to go. And if we look at the different countries and approaches, obviously, many countries are starting to develop their own AI regulations. And we've seen in the important development that happened in Europe with a risk-based approach going from minimal risk to very high and unacceptable risk. Where Canada, we've gone with the Bill C-27 and the ADA Act, the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, that hasn't passed, but it's very much focused on a voluntary code of conduct. And while many other nations are developing this and with great merits, ultimately we don't have one formal treaty that will guide the whole principles. So how do we create ultimately economic growth and a right worldwide market growth economy, and at the same time creating the right impetus for global AI governance? The second aspect is how do we take AI to market, or AI innovations to market? We know that the main test of AI development is the ability to move into industrial applications, whether it's in energy, transportation, manufacturing, health, and many other capabilities. And while we're seeing some development in that space from the health sector in accelerating clinical trials, or even vaccine development, or providing precision and personalized health, manufacturing and automation of supply chain logistics, inventory control, projection of manufacturing yield, and even in the agricultural industry and many other industries associated with that, the extent of application of AI in industry has lagged a little bit behind. And if you ask many of the micro and small medium enterprises, they would say that, or they would cite that the majority of the reason for them not adopting these technologies could be 4 or 5, at least 4 main criteria. The first is obviously skills and talent availability for these organizations. Obviously, regulatory certainty play a bigger component on that. Access to financing and capital is critical to this dimension. But also, interestingly, is knowledge mobilization of industrial AI applications that they can relate to and be able to adopt freely to do that. So how can we, as a global economy, figure a way of accelerating the incentives to help specifically the small medium enterprises adopt these technologies going forward? The third that I'd like to discuss is data sovereignty and cross-border flow. As we know that data is the lifeblood of AI, and in the absence of this, AI cannot develop to the extent necessary that we need. And it's interestingly that digital trade in the last number of years have expanded to such a rate that it's even rivaling trade in goods. In fact, digital trade recently has been estimated at around $2.9 trillion annually, which is quite significant. And that is mainly in digital services, whether it's access to health, financial banking, or to streaming videos, or access to cloud data, or even AI compute. All of these configure that environment. But ultimately, many countries view data sovereignty as a critical component for them to protect intellectual property, copyrights, privacy, and many other aspects, and obviously national security that comes into picture into this. So how do we fuel this environment, allow data mobility between nations, but at the same time ensuring sovereignty, national sovereignty and autonomy going forward? The fourth item that I would like to discuss is talent. Obviously, talent is and will continue to be the essence of any high-performing economy. And we know that AI will displace jobs, but it will also create more jobs. So ultimately, how do we design this workforce development capabilities to be able to make the development of the talent in tandem with the advancement in AI technology? And are we at a stage in AI development where we have to rethink AI knowledge as very similar to numeracy and literacy in schooling? So at least we're creating the future ready talent in this space. Last but not least is the one of AI competition and AI sovereignty. It is estimated that approximately 75% of the patents are created in AI, and 2/3 of investment or private investment in AI are generated by three main regions: North America and mainly the US, the EU, and China. And it's estimated as well that to train what they call the frontier models could cost upwards of $100 million. So it can only be afforded by economies that are powerful enough to create that environment. So how can, the question is, as the result of the discussions that are happening now between Canada and Europe, how can we both look into that to create that bridge capability for an environment to ensure that there is a larger market economy globally being created that we can advance collectively going forward? So to dive more into these questions, we have a rare opportunity to dialogue with distinguished guests and subject matter experts in this space. And the way the panel that would how it would roll out is that I will introduce the panelists, just name and title, because we have more information on the web. I will then give each panelist 3 minutes to provide their reflections on this matter, but also to frame discussions going forward. And after that, we'll jump straight into the Q&A. As Lisa mentioned, that a lot of that, we have the chat capability. So if you wish to ask questions, by all means do that. And hopefully we'll be able to entertain these questions if we have time at the end. So with that in mind, let me start by introducing the panelists. So the first is Commissioner Philippe Dufresne from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. And by the way, Commissioner, looking at the internet, I think there's congratulations in order, because I see that you've been nominated as the chair of the Global Privacy Assembly, collaborating with 130 countries around the world. So congratulations on that. That's phenomenal. Next is Emanuela Girardi from Adra, which is the AI Data and Robotics Association, very recognized and knowledgeable organization in research and policy in Europe with a large network and outreach in that space. And last but not least is Alan. So Emanuela is obviously the president and CEO of Adra. Alan Veerman, who is the Chief Operations and Financial Officer from Vector Institutes, again, a very recognized organization in Canada with excellence in leadership in AI and machine learning, Canada and internationally. So with that in mind, maybe Commissioner Dufresne, if I can ask you to start with that, with around 3 to 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Namir, to you and to the UN for this invitation to speak on this supremely important topic, how to develop technology responsibly in a manner that respects and protects privacy interests and supports strong economies, including the Canadian economy and the world economy. These are priority areas for me as Privacy Commissioner of Canada, especially with the rapid adoption of generative AI across the board. Alors, merci beaucoup pour cette invitation de joindre à vous pour discuter de ce sujet tellement important et pertinent au Canada et dans le monde. First, I'll say that I am committed to the belief that effective privacy and data protection can be strong drivers of innovation. This past June, I had the honor of hosting the 2025 G7 Data Protection and Privacy Authorities Roundtable in Ottawa. And in our joint statement, my G7 counterparts and I emphasized that responsible innovation, where privacy considerations are embedded throughout the life cycle of technology, can support confidence and trust in the digital world and can be a driver of economic success and societal growth. This theme was reinforced last week through my engagements at the 47th Conference of the Global Privacy Assembly in Seoul, South Korea. Data protection and privacy authorities from around the world recognize the imperative of working together at this time of unprecedented data-driven change to shape a future where innovation can flourish, privacy rights are respected, and trust is reinforced. Collaboration at all levels, domestic, international, and cross-regulatory, will be key to making that happen. In December 2023, I hosted an international symposium on generative AI. The Vector Institute was there. I was very proud to welcome them, where I launched a set of principles for responsible, trustworthy, and privacy-protective generative AI technologies developed jointly with my provincial and territorial counterparts in Canada. This laid out our expectations on how key privacy principles apply when developing, providing, or using generative AI tools, products, and services, and includes things like privacy by design and labeling of content. In my work with the G7 data protection and privacy authorities, we often reiterate that current laws apply to AI, and so it's not a law-free zone. I've worked carefully and closely with numerous other groups to forge international collaboration and coordination in Asia Pacific on topics like de-identification of information and building further bridges for safe flow of data between Canada and the Asia Pacific region. We've collaborated on similar initiatives on a global stage with the Global Privacy Assembly. Thank you for mentioning my election as chair of the Assembly's Executive Committee. And as chair, my priorities will include addressing the privacy impacts of technology, championing youth privacy, and continuing progress towards strong economies and a higher level of data protection in global frameworks, including through data free flow with trust. And last week, I joined 15 other data protection authorities in signing a joint statement on trustworthy data governance for AI that calls for data protection principles to be incorporated into the design of AI systems, but also talks about things like sandboxes and other tools to stimulate economy and reduce risks and provide greater certainty. Lastly, my office was one of the founding members of the Canadian Digital Regulators Forum, which brings together regulators from across different regulatory fields, such as privacy, competition, telecommunication, and copyright, to share knowledge and expertise. We've also joined the international network of digital regulation cooperation to strengthen these international ties. And just last Friday, we released a paper on the issue of synthetic media and how it is dealt with in the various regulatory fields. And so collaboration is key. And we're going to continue to work together and to exchange so that we can have, and Canadians can have, innovation, strong economy, public interest, but also the fundamental right to privacy. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Commissioner Dufresne. I think you've raised so many aspects that I'd love to explore and discuss as we go through the panel discussion. But maybe we'll move to Emanuela. If you can provide the 3 minutes reflection on the subject matter.
Yes, thank you, Namir. Good evening, good afternoon to everybody, depending on where you're staying. And bonsoir et bonjour à tous. So I think that, like Namir and Philippe said in the beginning, we are living in a sort of AI revolution today, really a new technological revolution. And this requires a completely new approach to the governance, because on one side, like Namir, he just said, on one side, we have the capabilities of AI that are really scaling in months. And on the other side, we have instead the policy making that, sometimes it takes years to move on. So this gap can bring, this gap can bring very powerful technologies into our society, but without proportionate guardrails. So the answer is not to slow innovation, is not to stop regulating, but is to try to coordinate this new approach. From our work at Adra, the AI Data and Robotics Association, which is the partner in the public-private partnership with the European Commission, we have learned 3 lessons. The first one is that we should try to co-create sort of agile governance. So to define new mechanisms, such as, for instance, the code of practice, safety baselines, common evaluation protocols, and co-develop these new tools, these new legal tools, with industry, with academia, with civil society, and with governments. And this will allow rules to evolve with the science. So in this moment, we will have compliance that becomes partnership and not friction. So this is the first point. The second point, I think that we should try to look behind the big tech. So really to focus, like Namir also mentioned before, really on the industrial adoption. So prosperity arrives when AI leaves the lab and moves into the industry, into the hospital, into the society. So I think that today, if we look at the adoption of AI by SMEs, it's still very low. It's under 20% in many sectors. So we need new implementation strategy. I think that we need interoperability of data and data spaces. We need standards, and we need some target public incentive. For instance, we developed in Europe Industry 4.0 of Industry 5.0, and we need to link them to upskilling and reskilling plans. And the last point that I want to bring is the protecting talent development. So the early optimism about net job creation has met a sort of tougher reality. So AI often augments the senior roles while automates the entry-level ones. If we think about this, if we remove the first rung of the ladder, I mean, going into the job position, we break the social mobility, basically. So we need to tie incentives to apprenticeship, to reskilling, and to human-in-the-loop work. I think that what we need is really a governance of the impact of AI on the job. So to conclude, I think that a global AI compact should have 4 things. First, set shared safety and evaluation norms, like the code of practice, for instance. Enable trusted cross-border data flow, skills, and then the third point is mobilize blended finance for compute, for skills, and for SME adoption. And the last point, I think that we should commit to some sort of measurable human outcomes, like the number of jobs created, the emission reduced, if I think about the energy, or how much we improve the services. So altogether, I think that if we align the speed with the responsibility, AI can really advance sovereignty, sustainability, and growth altogether. Thank you. Merci.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emanuela. I think a lot of the aspects you raised intersect with what was raised as well before, and Commissioner also Dufresne, but would love to expand on that discussion. Maybe we'll jump on Alan, and then we can start the Q&A. Alan, floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Namir. At the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence here, I describe it to people that we work at the intersection of academia, governments, industry, startups, and institutions. And the reason that we need to do that is we're ultimately chasing value out of AI. All of these things, sovereignty, sustainability, I think they are dependent or a key dependency on economic growth of some kind. And even though we acknowledge that AI advancement is moving at a breathtaking pace, what we're really focusing on is chasing the value of that knowledge. So when people describe AI breakthroughs as very valuable, we would say, okay, well, take a research paper and try to buy a sandwich with it and see how far that gets you. In contrast, if you really want to derive value out of AI, you're looking for ways to do things cheaper, faster, more efficiently to improve the quality of lives of the citizens that you're working with. So the Vector Institute has an economic development mission. And when we look at what we're trying to advance in AI, we're ultimately looking at leading indicators like the number of projects that we've done, the number of code adoptions that we've done, the number of reference implementations that we've built, but we're also looking at lagging indicators. So we are looking at job growth, we're looking at private and public sector investment, we're looking at the improvements in the efficiency of operations with our institutional partners, and are they implementing AI in a safe and sustainable way? All of the themes that some of the panelists have addressed, the talent, the data, the compute, we view those as interdependencies in our ultimate mission of economic advancement. And so the contribution we would try to make to a discussion like this as governments and institutions and companies consider investments in AI is what they're ultimately doing is chasing value, and chasing value in a framework of principles and laws that is in accordance with the culture of their own jurisdiction. And to the extent that Canada has been looking for like-minded partners around the globe to advance that mission, we're also doing so at the subnational level in terms of economic job growth, because we're ultimately trying to use AI not just as a means to an end, but to improve the lives of our citizens.
Wonderful. Thank you. Again, raises very interesting areas and questions in my mind. Maybe we'll jump into the questions straight away. And potentially the first question is to Commissioner Dufresne. So as I highlighted in my earlier presentation, the lag between innovation and governance, or at least regulations. The question is, in this environment, how can we create regulations, or a framework for regulations that fosters innovation, but at the same time protects the society from harm, whether it's privacy, and many other aspects on that, or biases, or concentration of power, and others. Is that a possibility, and how can we advance that agenda?
Thank you, Namir. I think it can be done. The reality is that legislation and regulation, they're always going to move much more slowly than technology and innovation, especially now. But I think I would argue it was true before. Sometimes legislation is slow for parliamentary reasons, or one of the things I learned over time in the parliamentary world is that time is a very, very precious resource for lawmakers. And so that's always going to be a challenge. We need to have, first of all, principles-based legislation. We need to have legislation that will apply broadly to technologies. That's what we have right now in Canada with the private sector privacy legislation. So it's technology neutral, and it's based on the privacy principles. We need to augment that with guidance from the regulator. We need to augment that with regulation from the government that can be done a little bit more nimbly. And we need to do that in consultation with industry to see what are the challenges, what are the opportunities. And we need to remember the incentives, everything that you've been talking about now. How can we create the situations where industry will be prepared to make the investments? So I'm a big supporter, for instance, of codes of practice, certification program, things that industry can invest in, and then it gives them some more certainty, regulatory certainty in developing products. It protects them in some cases from regulatory action or fines. So I think we need to create these environments where there are rewards for organizations who act well and who invest in privacy.
Excellent. Do you think on the world stage, maybe a follow-up question, Commissioner, on the world stage, is there a better mechanism of creating a larger framework that creates a global market economy for us to all operate in?
Well, I think you mentioned international treaties. Of course, that's certainly a tool, and there's work in that direction. But I think in the meantime, one of the reasons why, for instance, I have been so active internationally is because collective action from regulators is important. When we work together and we set out clear, consistent principles and guidance, like in the statement that we just issued last week, like in the work that we do at the G7 when we champion and promote the work of the OECD. For instance, the Declaration on Government Access to Data from Private Sector Companies, championing the rule of law, championing key privacy principles, championing innovation. I think that amplifies the voice, and in fact, that collaboration we are expanding it not just within the privacy data protection world, but also with other regulatory fields like competition, broadcasting, copyright. So I think that's what we can do as regulators. We're not legislators, but we are certainly guidance producers, and we hear complaints, we make decisions. So we're going to continue to use the tools that we have, and ultimately to make some recommendations to legislators, and ultimately to sovereign states as treaty ratifiers.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Emanuela, do you wish to add any points to this question?
Well, I think that I agree actually with what the commissioner said. On top of this, I think that the first level should definitely be the principle. Then we should go maybe for a global AI governance a little bit more into the practical level, and to work on standard. Because if we define, for instance, what trustworthy AI is, or what transparency or robustness is, then we need to define the standard to be able to develop it and to measure it. And then I think we need to go a little bit more deeper and to define some sort of framework to measure it, to evaluate and so to assess if these technologies, this system are truly robust, are truly trustworthy, and so on. Then I think it is impossible to have global AI regulation. But once we have a principle, standard, and practical tools, then each country or each area like the US, Europe, or Canada can have a specific regulation, but it's always aligned with these three different levels of implementation of the governance. This will make it much easier to have some system that can be deployed globally. So now it's not really happening because in Europe we have different rules at the moment, but also to be able to have some systems, the AI systems, that are also safe and robust in the same way in US, in China, or in Europe.
That's great, Emanuela. So in your view, who should lead this globally? Is it the United Nations? Is it who in your mind could lead this and could make it happen? It's tough
exactly.
questions.
So
I didn't promise to be an easy questions.
Well, so in Europe, we are facing, one of the challenges of Europe is fragmentation. So the AI Act is one attempt to have a single regulation in AI and to create a truly single digital market. And I think that for this, it's quite successful because, I mean, for a company to be able, for a startup in AI, to be able to invest across Europe, they need to have a single digital market. So also, like what you mentioned in the beginning, some stability, so some certain rules. And this, I think, is happening and is quite successful. Then if we talk about the current AI Act, for instance, last week, just a few days ago, the President Draghi criticized it and said that it's too tough, too strict for developing innovation, deploying innovation in Europe. I think that there are some things that could be made better, probably in the implementation phase. But this, we saw also what happened with the code of practice, for instance, because we worked together for almost 9 months with about 1,000 people coming from different regions of the world. There were some people from Canada, there were some people from US, there were several people from Europe, and it was a multi-stakeholder approach. So there were people coming from industry, from academia, from civil society, and for government. And we work on defining the implementation of the rules that will be enforced by the AI Act and that are really impacting on the AI system that are posing a systemic risk. And I think that this work that was truly multi-stakeholder, and that, I mean, in the beginning, I was a little skeptical, I have to say, because I thought, why do we have people from Canada and US, I mean, located in Canada, at least in US, working on implementing the rules of the AI Act? But I have to say that after 1 year, the final version is definitely much better than the first draft that we had. And probably this global diversity really, I mean, improved enormously, I think, the final text, because I mean, it surfaced some edge cases and it accelerated the consensus on a sort of workable safeguards. So the final code definitely is significantly stronger than the first draft. And the most important thing is that most of the big tech companies already signed it. So it means that it's something that it's feasible, that it's acceptable, and now they will follow the rules that, I mean, will allow an implementation of the AI Act.
Excellent. Thank you, Emanuela. Alan, maybe we'll dive straight into the next aspect that's on the mind of everybody, is that how do we move innovation and AI to markets? As Emanuela mentioned earlier in her introductory remarks, that how do we move innovation into farms, hospitals, and manufacturing sites and others? What are the catalysts? What has to take place from your perspective in that arena?
I think looking at it from the nation state perspective, what we're ultimately really talking about in terms of driving AI adoption is providing the infrastructure to do so, that the sovereignty, whether it's AI sovereignty, data sovereignty, all of those things are enabled by what we call the infrastructure of AI. And part of that is compute, part of that is data, part of that is the talent that drives it. And the metaphor that I've adopted for this is, I talk about in some of my public-facing talks, the idea of when we invented literacy, governments built schools. When we invented medicine, governments built hospitals. When we invented cars, governments built highways. Now, when we're in the age of AI, governments really need to start to think about AI infrastructure as if it was infrastructure. So the idea that we are providing the compute necessary, the data paths necessary to work with AI, and those things allow for AI adoption. And to the extent, if you use the metaphor of infrastructure to a highway system, if it's a tolled system available only to the richest people who can pay, then you're going to create one type of system. But if it's a general infrastructure system that is accessible to all, and the metaphor of public transit, then you're going to see different results. We've internalized in the Vector Institute this idea of when we're really talking about our assets, we're also talking about our people. And so we understand and work in a context where we understand that investment can go anywhere, branch plants can go anywhere. The people that work and develop these systems and the societies in which they are raised and the values of those societies guide the development of AI. And so I think the most important piece of advice that I can give in an international context to other nation states is you really need to think of your AI development as an ecosystem. And to that end, the ecosystem needs to be diversified enough that people have choices. So if they want to work in a large company, that's wonderful. If they want to do a startup, that's great. If they want to work in lawmaking and policy development, that's fine. If they want to do things in the entrepreneurial and venture capital space, that's fine. The second that someone says, I would like to do X, and your nation's ecosystem does not have X, that is when you are at risk of losing those people, and you will in turn lose their economic output. In contrast, I would say, to the extent that governments will focus on industrial strategies or research strategies or compute-based strategies, if they over-specialize, they are at risk of losing everything else. And so what they really need to think about is just infrastructure. And in my advice to government, I would say they should be less concerned with what the people do. So if they work in companies, that's fine. If they work in research, that's fine. If they work in both, that's also okay. From an economic development perspective, so long as the people do so in a particular jurisdiction and therefore raise families and build contacts with other people in that ecosystem that reflects that society's values, the economic output of their activities will accrue to those jurisdictions. And so governments should just provide the underlying infrastructure to do so. And I think that's what we start to think about when we think about concepts like AI sovereignty.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. I have follow-up questions, but I'll come back a little later if we have time. Maybe I'll jump on the data sovereignty and cross-border flow aspect, Commissioner Dufresne. as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is that data is the lifeblood of AI. Cross-border flows have to expand with the capabilities of, unleashing AI's full capability, not only for nations, but globally to do that. But ultimately, many nations view sovereignty of data in terms of privacy, but also IP protection, copyrights, and many others are critical. So how do we drive the balance between making the capability of AI grow, but at the same time managing the national sovereignty and and other aspects going forward?
Thank you for that question. And in a way, it really touches upon a core part of certainly my vision for privacy. I always have three parts to it. One, that privacy is a fundamental right. Two, that privacy supports public interest and strong economies and innovation. But three, that protecting privacy in a demonstrable way supports the necessary trust that citizens need to have in their institutions. And I think the discussion that we have on data sovereignty highlights what happens when you have lack of trust between nations and nations' systems. And there again, it creates these obstacles to the free flow of trust and potentially to innovation. So at the G7 roundtable this last June, we welcomed the G7 leaders' statement, which said that they reiterate the importance of operationalizing data free flow with trust through trustworthy cross-border data flows, and affirm its value in enabling trusted AI development and use. So that's what you're talking about here, that this flow is necessary for innovation, but we need to have the trusted conditions so that that data can flow. Otherwise, we're jeopardizing fundamental rights. And that's where things like the G7 statement, but the Global Privacy Assembly statement on key principles of rule of law and privacy and safeguarding that you need to have to allow flow of data. Systems like adequacy system in Europe, or the global CBPR, the OECD's declaration on trusted government access to private sector data. I think all of these remind us that we need to have a rule of law, fairness, transparency principles to safeguard that information. And we also need to have, sometimes in domestic legislation, some of these key principles. Currently in Canadian privacy law, the obligations for cross-border transfers are not very robust. We've recommended that there be some strengthening there, and hopefully we'll see some of that in the next version of C27 that the Minister Solomon talked about being in development.
Excellent. It sounds like, Commissioner, that you'll be leading some of those discussions through the Global Privacy Assembly, and we look forward to any development on that. So we'll be watching this.
Absolutely, and that's one of the key topics that I'm prioritizing.
Wonderful. Excellent. Good to see that. Maybe I'll jump into the talent, given that we have a couple of minutes, and then I'll come back to other questions. Emanuela, maybe from your perspective, you highlighted the importance of talent and skills development, and we know that AI does displace jobs, create other jobs on this. What's your perspective on this issue? How do we nurture that capability and skill, talent for today and tomorrow's economy?
Yes. So first of all, I already mentioned that we often hear that AI creates more jobs than it replaces, or that AI, we hear lots of tech CEOs who says that AI takes only the jobs of people who don't know how to use AI. But the point is that maybe it's true, but also maybe the point is that the impacts aren't evenly distributed. And we see that the entry-level roles are really shrinking on one side. And then we also saw in the past weeks several tech firms that recently announced thousands of replacements of junior roles with, not only junior roles actually, but replacement of roles with AI agents. So as I said before, the bottom ranks of the ladder are really at risk. But if junior roles vanish, how do young people learn? How they can gain judgment, context? How can they can they learn how to use a responsible AI? So I think that we really need a strong governance for a just transition here, and not just to have this sort of optimism about the new job creation. So what can we do? I mean, the AI literacy was already mentioned before, and I agree with everything that was said. I think that maybe good governments should start from protecting the early careers pathways, somehow maybe incentivize the apprentice-style roles where junior can really learn alongside seniors, and also they can learn AI together with seniors, so not being replaced by it. Then another thing that I think, I mean, every time we have a company that is announcing, cutting thousands of jobs and replacing them with AI agents, we need to oblige them to sort of publish a transition plan. I mean, the AI impact and transition plan. And this, to have a workforce assessment, a timeline, a reskilling budget, this is very important, and then also mobility targets. And these should be, I think, published and also reviewable. And then probably the last thing is that we need a sort of, how can I call it, maybe equity guardrails. So, I mean, track who benefits and who is bearing the cost. And maybe, tie public support and public financing to the initiatives that are really closing this gap. I think that this is very important. And the last part is that we really need to find a way, to protect the junior roles, maybe with mentorship with AI, or I don't know, maybe publish the automation charters. Just to make sure that to have a sort of pair innovation with a clear pathways for human development. Otherwise, I really think that we're sort of sacrificing the next generation opportunities here. And there are really lots of opportunities, lots of benefits with AI, but we need the governance. And I say it again, I know that I already said it, but we need the governance of the impact of AI on the job market.
Excellent. Thank you, Emanuela. We've got 2 minutes left, and I have to wrap up with this, but maybe Alan, if you can jump in on the same question that I asked Commissioner Dufresne on the data sovereignty aspect, and how do we, continue that flow? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't disagree with anything the commissioner said. I think when we're looking at it, we're just looking at two main elements. One is international operability, or the ability to have standards that are compatible with other jurisdictions. The government of Canada thinks this is an important principle, but we have to acknowledge that Canada is not that big a country on the global stage, and so our standards need to be compatible and recognized by others. Or put the other way, to the extent that we insist on creating our own path, or any other nation insists on creating their own rules that apply in that nation and nowhere else, what they're really saying is they won't participate in the global marketplace. And I think that's not the correct course of action. I think the other thing that we're always looking at when we're working on AI implementation is that we've never found in our entire history any company or institution or government that is against a principles-based approach or would say that that's a bad idea. But we then need to go the step farther to say, and we'll often look at it through the lens of what I describe as, what does that mean in real life? And so a company or an institution or a government, they can have their principles, they can have their AI trust approach, but the reality of where it gets work done is someone is staying in their office on a project team and it's 11:30 at night. They need a checklist of what they can and cannot work through to make it practical for the work that they're doing. And so I think one of the things we're always focused on is, how do you go the step beyond that, beyond the trust-based implementation framework or principles that will guide the strategy of an organization into how you actually extract value from AI in real life. And I think the ability to do so, the companies and institutions that master that art of translating AI-based innovation into tangible value for their own economies, for their companies and their institutions, will be the world leaders in the years ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. I think, this whole discussion has raised a lot of thoughts, insights, and even questions. In fact, we have questions from the audience that unfortunately won't be able to address because we've reached the top of the hour. Maybe just to close, I would like to thank everyone, all the panelists, for your tremendous contribution and insights into this discussion. I'm sure we could have continued for another hour in tackling some of these, and I look forward to the opportunity in the future as AI continues to develop and the applications of it, that we have the opportunity to discuss this even further. So thank you again for the time and the opportunity, for the presentations and for panel discussions, and wish you all the best, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci.
Merci.